Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Allison's normally the one who handles the Zoom part, so I'm doing this on my own like a big girl.
No, I know no matter how many I've done, every time I'm like, are my headphones going to work? Is the video going to work? Is
Yes.
everything
Well, I'm
okay?
hoping everyone can hear me and hear you. Guess we can start in about a couple of minutes. So where are you from, Nikki? Where are you joining?
I'm originally from New York, but I just moved to California, so that's where I am now.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Yes, but I think everywhere we are is hot right now. The whole country's hot.
Yes, I know. This is about as hot as I can remember Texas being. So
Really? Wow. Oh my
yeah, I
gosh.
think it was 108 degrees today, and we're looking at the 10-day forecast, and there's no single digits. I mean, no triple, they're all triple
Yeah,
digits.
yes. Oh my gosh. I know they're saying 104 in England, which is just unheard of. So,
Oh, I know.
oh my goodness.
Oh, good. Well, we've got a lot of people signed up for tonight, so I'm hoping that,
So will it be you and I talk for a little bit and then open it to everybody?
yes, we're trying to figure out the one thing we can't figure out how to do the chat. So maybe if you've got questions, just do it in question and answer instead of the chat. We try to figure out how to enable that today, and
Yeah.
see if I can figure
I
that out.
see. Yeah, I see someone asking if there's no chat.
I know. Yes, there may not be a chat tonight, but please, say anything you want in question and answer, and we'll get to it that way. So I'm not exactly sure what the deal is there, but very excited to start. We'll start in just a minute or two here. Let's see here. Have you been busy doing a lot of touring, or?
It's been busy, but I'm lucky that it's been busy. That's a very good thing. So.
Yeah. And congratulations for being Good Morning America on Good Morning America, and that's amazing. So
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be I'm flying to New York this weekend, and then I'll be in studio with Jenna and Hoda on Monday. So
perfect. Yeah,
that's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, Jenna's from they have a ranch near our house. The Bush
Yes,
Ranch
yeah.
is about 20 minutes away from us. So
oh really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, when he was president, we always knew when he was in town because all the helicopters, and
I'm sure traffic's probably shut down and yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, normally Allison joins us. She is one of the owners at the store, but she is helping with VBS right now. So for her church, so I'm doing it, and yeah, so I appreciate everyone giving me a break. So tonight we are discussing The Measure by Nikki Erlick. Nikki is a writer and editor whose work has appeared online with New York Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, Newsweek, Cosmopolitan, Indigo Travel, The Huffington Post, and Vox. She has a bachelor's degree from Harvard in comparative literature and a master's degree from Columbia University in global thought. The Measure is her debut novel. We are so excited to have you with us, Nikki.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And truly, your bookstore has been so supportive of this book from well before it was even published. So it's just I'm really, really grateful for that. That support from the very beginning, and really excited to be here.
Yeah, I guess I read this book maybe in the winter or early spring, and just blown away by it, and knew it was going to be a favorite of the year for sure. So yeah, and I'm just so thankful that others have felt the same way. So now this is really more of a book club discussion, so we can kind of talk spoilers. But so I'm guessing most of the people on this the Zoom have read it, but if not, can you give us kind of an elevator pitch of what The Measure is about?
Sure. So The Measure opens on what seems like an ordinary morning, but overnight something quite extraordinary has happened, which is that billions of mysterious boxes have appeared all around the world on the doorsteps of every adult. And every box has the same kind of cryptic message, which is the measure of your life lies within. And those who are brave enough to open the box realize that within each box is a single piece of string. And it's quickly sort of realized, because these boxes come around the whole world, so everyone can kind of collaborate and quickly understand that the measure of the length of string in your box does correlate with the ultimate length of your life. And so all of a sudden now the whole world is faced with the same choice of, do I want to open my box, measure the string, and learn the answer? And how does that affect, individuals? The book really focuses on 8 main characters and kind of how they deal with this decision and with the fallout, but also kind of how it affects broader society on sort of a larger scale as well.
Now, I've heard you talk about how there is a little Greek mythology in the measure, which I wasn't really thinking about other than, I guess, Pandora's box. Can you talk a little bit about the role of Greek mythology, or what made you decide to, what inspired you with Greek mythology?
Yeah, so that was really the very origin of the book, which is that I am someone who's always kind of struggled with like the randomness of life, and then just the fact that I think we all know that, fate doesn't treat everybody equally, and that sometimes things can feel very out of our control, especially during times like these last couple of years that we've all endured. And so I'm someone who's just kind of always struggled with that. And I wanted to see if maybe there was a way that I could use a story to help me make sense of these kind of big unanswerable questions about life and fate. And I was trying to figure out how could I possibly find a window into a story about, something like fate, so big and complicated. And then one day I remembered the Greek mythology, so the ancient Greek mythology around destiny, and their belief that it was these figures of the 3 fates, who were these 3 sisters who had this power to kind of spin these threads of life on their magical spindle. And it was them who was in charge of kind of allotting the amount of time that every mortal would receive. And I was really fascinated with these figures. The fact that it was these 3 women and 3 sisters who were believed to have this power. I'm a sister myself. I so really related to that. And I just wondered, what if these strings were real? And, what if somehow humans had access to them? And that was kind of the first thought. And I realized very quickly that I didn't want people to just be, forced to look at their string and just given this string and have no sort of say in the matter. I wanted it to be a choice that people could either look or not look. And, when I was thinking about that, if I'm going to make this a choice, I thought, who would possibly, have the willpower to resist the curiosity of looking, resist the temptation. And that's where kind of Pandora's box came in, where I thought it's sort of, that being the ultimate story of, can you resist the curiosity or not? And I thought, what if every string arrived in, an individual Pandora's box for each person? And then it was sort of the ultimate test of, of willpower. And I think also gives the characters a little bit more agency, because this is a book in which, the characters' fates are predetermined in one sense. Like, you can't change the length of your string, but I wanted people to have some sense of power and agency. And so that came from, it's a choice that you make as an individual to know or not to know. And it kind of restored a little bit of power to them.
Now, I'm sure you have thought about this and been asked this a lot, but do you think you would have opened the box? Because I've wondered that too. I think that I wouldn't want to know, but I would be so tortured with knowing that I could know.
I know, it's so tough. It's probably one of those things that I can't really know unless it was actually sitting right in front of me. But I went back and forth so many times while writing the book. I think like every character's sort of internal monologue of deciding whether or not to open the box is my monologue on one day or another. Right. But I think right now I'm not going to open the box, but I'd probably keep it somewhere in my house and maybe like check in every year with myself and see if I've changed, because I'm a little bit of an indecisive person. So I don't think I could say definitively I'm throwing away the box.
And I guess technically, if you kept waiting, would the string length change?
I guess technically it won't change, but you just have no way of knowing, what's ever in there. Which it would definitely be torturous to have it somewhere in the house, but I don't know. Have you come to a conclusion for yourself?
Yeah, I think I would want to know. I wouldn't want to know immediately, but maybe kind of get the lay of the land. Yeah. But I would have been too tortured to just know that, that it's sitting right there. Yes. And I know knowledge is always a little important to me. So I think I would want to know, I guess, but what a nightmare. This is why this is such a great book. There's so much to discuss and to think about.
That's the most common debate I see on like Instagram and Twitter, is people going back and forth like, oh, I need to know, I'm such a planner, like I need to be able to plan my life, and other people being like, heck no, never looking, people really engaging with it.
Yeah, for sure. So this book is told through 8 main characters, which really help flesh out the story and so many of the big questions that really the strings, or the length of the strings, could invoke. Can you discuss this tactic versus just one singular story?
Yeah. I think initially I thought that the story would have fewer characters and would be kind of just a love story between someone with a long string and someone with a short string. That was how I envisioned it at first. But the more time that I just kind of sat in this world and sort of sat with this question of, what would happen if these boxes arrived, I just kept thinking of other potential characters. Like they really kind of felt like they were sort of like knocking on my, imagination. And I think the first one was I was wondering, how would a doctor potentially respond when, they're dealing with life and death in a more kind of intimate way. And then I thought, well, how might a soldier respond when there's someone who's, potentially entering a dangerous career? Does that affect the way you sort of look at the box? And then I thought, well, how would a politician perhaps even kind of use this moment on a broader sort of, socio-political scale to maybe change the landscape as well? And I just, as much as I thought initially it would just be this love story, these other kind of plot points kept kind of flying into my head, and I sort of felt compelled to explore all of them, and wish that I could have included even more, characters and perspectives, because really, the possibilities are so limitless in this world. And so I know that I couldn't possibly touch on all of them. But I felt like once I had 8, I was like, I think this is enough. Otherwise, this is going to be, a 2,000-page book. I have to cut it off. But yeah, I had the 8, and then my sort of plan after that was finding ways to kind of interweave them. I knew that I wanted to do that from the start as well.
Yeah. So I was just thinking of a question. I know Julie Whalen is the audio narrator. Yes. Is that correct?
Yes. Fantastic.
She's phenomenal. I just finished reading her new book. But how was it having 8 characters with the audio? Have you heard any complaints about that? Was there any confusion?
Not that I've heard. And she's just so skilled that I think, if anyone can do it, she can. She's the expert. And we were super, super lucky that she was, available and felt a connection to the story and wanted to record it. So I haven't heard any confusion. I think that is a testament to, to her skill more than mine.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, are there any other plot points that you think, oh, I wish I almost put that in the story, but just with the spacing, I couldn't. Were there any other ones that you were interested in?
I think initially some earlier drafts of the book had kind of fleshed out a little bit more the kind of other characters in Ben and Maura's support group, and just kind of gave them a little bit more time on the page. But that was one of the kind of earlier revision stages of my agent, where we were thinking, it's getting a little too confusing here. Too many people are getting kind of airtime. And so I did have to cut back a little bit on them, which was tough at the time, but I know that it was the right decision for the sake of just, clarity.
Yes, I never had any issues with clarity in the book. And sometimes when you have that many characters, that could happen, but they were so vastly different, and their issues were so different. It was easy to keep track of them. So
thank you. I'm glad to hear it.
So there seems to be an allegory in the measure of the pandemic, the dividing of people into monoliths and making a non-political event extremely polarizing and, other inducing. And while you wrote during the pandemic, the idea for the novel came to you beforehand. If you can talk about that, did the pandemic help inform your writing, or was it already pretty much informed at that point?
It definitely helped inform it. Yes, as you mentioned, the idea for the strings had come first. And I think almost all of my characters already before the pandemic as well. And I was maybe a third of the way into the manuscript, so still in kind of the early beginning stages of the story. When we did go into quarantine. And of course, it was not lost on me that I happened to be writing about this, shocking global phenomenon, and then all of a sudden was living in the midst of, something similar, and was kind of watching how it unfolded. And I think, to me, the pandemic had this power of really bringing out the best and the worst in people. It became something that was very, as you said, very dividing. People sort of saying, it's us versus them. You're on my side or you're on their side. People kind of putting themselves above others, and so kind of in that sense bringing out sort of some of the worst impulses in us. But then also really, the very best, the people who were the healthcare workers and the teachers and, everybody on the front lines really putting their lives, in jeopardy for the sake of, their communities, and really showcasing the very best of humanity. And so I think I wanted the strings to have a similar effect, where I could show that it was something that could both kind of bring out the worst in people and the best in people. It was something that could both divide us up, as well as unite people and bring people together who maybe wouldn't have, found common ground beforehand, but now these strings were a new commonality for them and a new way to kind of unify people. And so I wanted that sort of larger unfolding of the story to kind of mirror what had happened in our world.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the speculative fiction genre. Now, this is a genre that I am not usually drawn to, but somehow you made the world easy for more literal thinkers like myself, capable of, believing in it. How do you think you accomplished that? Because the cover was so gorgeous, I thought, I'm picking this up, and it's not typically my favorite genre because I am very literal. So
I know I've had a couple people say that it feels like they're reading nonfiction, even though it's clearly fiction, which is really interesting, and I think a great compliment. I think, to me too, I didn't set out to write necessarily speculative fiction. I just had this idea and was interested in it. And then as I was writing, realized, this is a little, I guess, a little sci-fi, a little, magical realism, a little, so all these other elements to it. But I knew from the start that I wanted it to be really grounded in kind of our world. And that even though it was this, sort of magical event happening, that I wanted it to be a very human story and really, the story of these characters living through this moment. And so not a story about, the sort of where did the strings come from, what sort of special power created them, not kind of leaning into that sci-fi element, and more sort of staying in the, well, what's the human side of the story? How do these humans deal with it? And I think also purposely deciding to set the book in kind of modern day was something as well, because I think a lot of, speculative dystopian fiction is sometimes set in the future. And so it, feels like this is not our society. It's a version of our society 100 years from now that, we've allowed to come to be. And so I wanted this to really look like our world as it is right now. And so people could very easily picture themselves in it and, picture themselves receiving this box and wondering how it would impact their life as it is right now and their kind of broader community as it is right now. And just kind of giving that greater sense of sort of relatability to the world, I think makes it a little bit more accessible to readers who, aren't quite as drawn to sort of the more genre stories.
Yeah, I think that's what I found so fascinating is, I guess, because we lived through this global pandemic, we kind of see how we do react. Some people are, it kindness or not, the best and the worst, right. And also just dividing people up. I mean, that to me was such an interesting phenomenon in the pandemic, and this really plays a whole lot in the measure.
Yeah, and obviously it's something that we've done, certainly before the pandemic as well. Like there, I was really drawing on so many different, ways that we've kind of carved our society into different tribes and sort of labeled people. And it was sort of seen on full display in the pandemic, but it's something that I think will unfortunately always be, relevant whenever people are reading this book.
Yeah, just human nature, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
Fortunately and unfortunately. And kind of talking about that with the short stringers, it almost seemed like an allegory for the marginalized communities. Can you kind of speak to that as well? I mean, was that something you thought about when you were writing it?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't write them as a sort of a specific parallel to any one community. I wanted it to be very open to, you know, individual interpretation. But I did kind of draw on, you know, aspects of history to sort of inform the experience of the short stringers. And I wanted it to feel very authentic and realistic. So for example, spoilers, the sort of relationship of the short stringers to the military in the story is kind of, you know, drawing on the history of the LGBTQ plus community within the US military, the kind of profiling of short stringers as potentially dangerous, potential terrorists is, you know, sort of drawing upon the mistreatment and the profiling of the Muslim American community, along with others. And so I, you know, purposely tried to draw from many different historically marginalized groups to make this feel authentic and applicable. But my hope is that the book is ultimately showing that, you know, love and empathy can triumph over those kind of more dividing qualities that we have, and can triumph over this sort of fear of the other that we seem to have as a society, and that, you know, that there is always a reason to believe in change and in sort of the goodness of human nature, and to believe that, you know, we don't always have to behave the way that we have in the past. That was, you know, certainly my hope for a takeaway from the book.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's interesting also that these long stringers kind of felt invincible. And you really said, you know, that you might live a really long life, but you may be a quadriplegic, or, you know, they didn't take as good care of themselves, I guess. So,
right. Or you could, you know, maybe live your life in prison live all 50 years in prison or something. Yeah.
That was an interesting thought as well. I love that. So I love that some of the questions are answered. I love the ending, just how everything, it felt like a movie where it's like, oh, and this is how they wound up, and this is how they wound up. So we really find out what happens to the main characters, but we never find out where the boxes come from. So how did you decide what you were going to answer and what you were going to leave to the imagination?
Yeah, I think I've always loved kind of books or films that have that sort of epilogue in the end, where we do have this sort of flash forward and see kind of, you know, 10 years later, 20 years later, where everyone ended up. So I think I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to do something like that as well. And, you know, give a little bit of a sense of closure, because as you mentioned, I don't necessarily give closure to answering those other questions. And I think, you know, I thought about it a lot, but ultimately felt like there are a lot of sort of mysteries in life, you know, and whether you believe that in a religious sense, where there is a higher power whose, you know, workings we are not necessarily privy to understanding, or just in a more secular sense, that there are kind of things that happen in the world that we don't know why they happen the way they did. They're just, you know, mysteries of the universe. And so for me, the boxes kind of fell into that category, that, you know, a theme in this book is sort of accepting what we don't know, accepting what we can't control, and sort of learning to live with that uncertainty. And I feel like that is something that we all have to learn in real life. And so I wanted the characters to kind of sort of be confronted with that same thing as well. And I think also there was a part of me that felt like if I answered where the strings came from, I would have to answer then, you know, what determines the length of a person's string, and sort of why some people have long strings and some people have short strings. And, you know, I can't answer that. That's something that, you know, unfortunately, I don't know. And I felt like it would almost be wrong of me to kind of make up a reason why. And so, if we humans have to kind of accept that unknowing, then I sort of let the characters accept it as well.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to pause here for a second for people who joined after we started. We can't figure out how to undisable or to able the chat. So if you have questions, we're going to get to them at the end in the Q&A. We can see the Q&A, just not the discussion. So feel free to let us know there. We did try this afternoon, could not figure it out. So that's a little different than normal, but all right. Back to our regularly scheduled program. I'm sure it was fun to flesh out how various people would handle their relationships to the strings, but was it daunting to flesh out how different countries would handle each citizen's strings? I thought that was such a fascinating part of the story.
Yeah, that was definitely a little more daunting, because I felt like I know sort of the American culture pretty well, having lived here my whole life, and I felt like I had a pretty good handle on how we would react. But I certainly don't know other countries as well, which is why I, purposely didn't spend too much time in any other countries, other than the kind of brief trip to Italy, which happens to just be like, a country that I really love, and it's sort of my favorite place to go, and wanted to kind of pay tribute to them and their culture in the book. But yeah, it was just kind of having this, I think, sense of openness that the way we do things here in America is not necessarily the way that people would react in other countries, and kind of having the characters just note that, like, that, we're doing things uniquely here, and I think that, certainly then other countries, like I have China and North Korea, kind of behaving in a much more, authoritarian manner, and sort of making these sweeping mandates about, about the strings that are kind of in line with, certain what I've read in the news about these countries, and kind of, the surveillance state in China and things like that. It made sense to me that then they would kind of use these strings as part of this kind of broader, surveillance. But yeah, I felt like I wanted to set the book predominantly in the US because I had the firmest handle on kind of how I felt like the US would handle this. Even though, of course, it is fiction, and perhaps I could be proven entirely wrong if something like this ever does come to be.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting day
Yeah.
for sure. So what about, I'm just curious, what about the strings and finding out the strings scared you the most when you were kind of coming up with these ideas? What was the most alarming thing to you?
I think the fact that they can't be changed. I think that was initially a thought of mine as well, that I was like, okay, well, maybe they can, if you see the string, to something about seeing your string potentially allow you to change it. But I thought that, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is kind of accepting that, accepting the things that we don't have control over, and sort of accepting the way that fate works. And so that to me is the kind of the most daunting aspect, that once you see it, it can't be changed. That's it. And it was stressful at times to write the book and to kind of be sitting in that headspace. But my goal was that ultimately the book, even if there is some sort of stress and anxiety and fear in it, that it's ultimately, more uplifting and more hopeful, and kind of more life affirming than the opposite.
Yeah, I think the thing that really got to me was thinking of relationships, what you would do if one was long and one was short, and true love. And I guess I'm a romantic at heart, but that really got to me. I think that would be a good,
absolutely,
dating game with the strings. So
no, absolutely.
Now I wanted to ask you, this is your debut novel, which is stunning. First of all, I mean, just so
thank you.
What about that process has surprised you? Just having a debut novel come to life?
Yeah. I think, this might not be surprising to other people, but to me it was just the kind of openness within the publishing and literary community to debut novelists. I think when I was, trying to find an agent for the book, and then we were trying to find a publisher, just thinking, is anyone even going to take a chance on just a completely unknown writer, someone who has not published before? I was like, who would be willing to do that? And so the fact that people out there are willing to do that, and that they're actually very excited to discover new writers, is really inspiring. That, that publishers are excited about it, that booksellers are excited about it, and that readers are, because I think it would be quite easy to, only read sort of the famous people, only read your tried and true favorites, and sort of books that you're going to like, you've loved this author for years and years. So, every reader who is out there actually wanting to sort of try something new and sort of take a chance on someone new, I'm personally very grateful to them, and I find that, just really inspiring about the sort of the whole community at large.
Yeah. I have to admit, I'm a big fan of debut novelists. I'm always trying to find those diamonds in the rough, and not even the rough, just hidden gems. And this one was certainly, it's no longer hidden. It's you can't keep it in the store, and we've just everyone.
Oh gosh.
so much. So,
Oh, thank you.
so I have a question here from Sarah Oliver. Have you thought of doing a sequel to tell different stories or from a different country? I would love to hear what happens. Well, to the strings in other countries. We kind of talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah, at the moment, I don't think the next book that I write will be a sequel, but I purposefully, I think, kind of left some, like no pun intended, some sort of strings left loose or left untied at the end of the book, and kind of chose to end with this, the idea of the sort of the children, the next generation, is potentially something that could be revisited down the line. But at the moment, I think this is sort of a standalone book.
Yeah. And someone was asking, of course, the cover is gorgeous. The colors are fantastic.
Fantastic.
But there's no box on the cover. So I wonder what was the thought in the bouquet? Were you in on that discussion at all? The graphics?
Yeah, I was involved, which was great. But I was sort of clear from the beginning that I'm not a visual artist. I was very happy to give free rein to, the people who are actual experts in this, which is interesting because, some authors do say, like, I am a painter, I am a sort of artist, and I would like to be involved, intimately. And so I was happy to kind of hand that over. And we were talking about, how literal should the cover be? I do remember there being discussions about, do we want a box on a doorstep? Do we want a box with a string inside? Things that were very clearly kind of displaying the plot. And I think we ultimately decided we wanted something a little more symbolic, a little more kind of evocative of these sort of emotional themes of the book, as opposed to the sort of specific plot elements. And so then when I saw this design with the bouquet and how the designer managed to still incorporate the string, sort of subtly in there, I thought that was just kind of a stroke of genius. That, if you know it's the string, then you get it. You see sort of the string of two different lengths, then you're in on it. And if not, then it just looks like a beautiful bouquet. Yes. And I think to me, the bouquet is something that really represents kind of the balance of life and death. It has flowers that are both kind of living and sort of dead. And also bouquets are something that, you lay at a gravesite, but also that a bride carries on their wedding day. They're the sort of present for the great sorrows and the great joys of life, and show how they kind of exist side by side. And so to me, that's my personal interpretation of the bouquet. I think, it can be open to other interpretations, which is nice. And certainly someone mentioned the colors. I think, we had a couple of different color combinations. And as soon as we all saw this one, we were like, this is it. This is, the gold is like sort of like this sunrise, the sort of dawn of a new day. It feels very hopeful to me. So we stopped all other sketches at that point.
Oh yeah, it's just beautiful. I have heard, the trend is very saturated covers because they look better on thumbnails when you're like,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's
that
why
makes
I
sense.
think that's saturated colors. But
yes, there's a lot of bright colors now on books, like pinks and blues and purples and green, everything. So, but
I heard that, I'm like, oh, it really is true. So, and did you name the book? Did you come up with the title, or did the publicist come up with the title?
I did come up with the title. It was actually so funny. You're the first person in any interviews asked me about the title. It was actually the title that was always on my Word document as I was typing from the very beginning. And when I first put it in, I was like, this is a placeholder. This is temporary. And then, 2 years later, I was like, actually, no, I think maybe this will work. And it kind of works on sort of the literal level, obviously the measure of the string, but then, to me, it evokes kind of the measure of a man, the measure of a society, kind of, the measure of a life, all of these things. And nobody at any point questioned it, which is interesting. I thought at some point there would be like a publisher or someone saying, let's talk about the title, but it seemed to just always slip by accepted.
Yeah, oh, it's great. Well, just a few more questions. If any, this is kind of last chance for Q&A. But what are you working on now? This is one of my last questions. And what are you reading right now?
Right now, I am brainstorming ideas for the next book. I think what I liked about this book was kind of this intertwining ensemble of characters. I would think I would like to try to do something like that again. And what I'm reading, I'm in the middle of The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas, which I know came out a little while ago. It's been a very busy little bit of time now, so I'm a little behind on my reading. But it's an odd choice for me because I normally can't read anything that is potentially described as like scary. I'm really prone to nightmares. I get scared so easily. But the premise of this just really intrigued me as kind of a retelling of Rebecca, which was one of my favorite books when I was younger. And so I was like, I have to brave the nightmares for this one. And it's so far I'm okay. It's really quite entertaining.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. Well, we are just so thankful that you joined us today. We've been so excited to talk to you. And if you don't mind, just for a minute, we're going to introduce our next book club book.
Sure, absolutely.
But so far this year, there have been two books that have really stood out to me that were great for discussion. And one of them was The Measure, and the other is for next month, and that is Any Other Family by Eleanor Brown. Now, I think, Heather, if you will put the link in as a question, I think people can probably get it that way. We're just going to pivot. And you can sign up that way, or you can also sign up at Fabled under events. But on August the 9th, we'll be talking to Eleanor Brown about her book. And this is a lot about found family, a woman who continues to have children that she cannot take care of, and they're adopted into different families. And these families have decided to keep the children sort of semi together. So they do different holidays together and vacations together, and they're all together one day, and the birth mom calls back and calls them when they're on vacation and said, "I'm pregnant again. Who would like to have my next baby?" So a lot of discussion about found family, about what it means to be a mother, the different types of mothering. And the author is hysterical. And I got to talk to her at an event a couple of months ago, and I'm very excited to talk to her again. So, but Nikki, we're just so thankful that you came on, and we wish you the best of luck. And
thank you.
Yes, so
I'm going to add that one to my list now when I finish The Hacienda.
You'll enjoy it. It's really, really good. And again, my two favorite discussion books back to back. So anyway, we thank you and hope you have a wonderful evening. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.